She said, "No one wants me. Phir Meri Zindagi Badal Gayi." I keep hearing those words in my head, over and over, like some slow, stubborn echo I can't escape. I don't even know why she said it. Maybe because I asked too many questions, or maybe because she thought no one would listen. But that line, it stuck. It was late afternoon at the little bookstore tucked into the corner of the street, the one with the faint smell of old pages and polished wood. Sunlight dribbled through the high windows in golden stripes across the floor. I was leaning against a shelf, my hands awkwardly buried in my jacket pockets, pretending to read the back of a worn-out novel I didn't care about. And then she walked in. She had this way of moving that felt like she owned the space without trying. Mid-40s, I'd guess, but with this effortless grace that made the years look like a story, not a number. Her hair fell softly around her shoulders, just messy enough to feel real, and there was a sharpness in her eyes, like she could see through all the small pretenses in the room. She smiled at the cashier, a quick, polite curve of lips, and then turned toward me. That's when she said it. No, she didn't say anything yet, but the air changed, somehow, like a room shifting slightly when someone important walks in. I caught her glance out of the corner of my eye. There was a flicker there, recognition, maybe amusement, maybe judgment. My stomach tightened, and I realized I hadn't even noticed how cold the bookstore felt until that moment. I wanted to look away, but something kept my eyes pinned on her, as if she were a riddle I couldn't stop trying to solve. She walked past me, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something soft, warm, but not overpowering. And then, the strangest thing happened. She reached down to pick up a book that had slipped behind the counter, and without thinking, I moved closer, my hand brushing hers for the briefest instant. A tiny spark, and we both froze, our eyes meeting just a second too long. She looked at me, and I swear she almost smiled. Almost. But then her expression hardened, confident and unreadable. "Do you need help with that?" I asked, my voice a little too loud, a little too eager. "No, I've got it," she said, calm, steady. But there was a softness in her tone, just beneath the surface, like she was letting me into a part of her she didn't usually show. I wanted to ask her why she sounded so lonely, why her eyes flickered for just a heartbeat before regaining their coolness, but I didn't. I couldn't. I only stood there, fumbling with my words, wishing I could linger in that brief, electric pause just a little longer. She moved on, scanning the shelves, and I followed at a careful distance, not wanting to seem obvious. She picked up a journal, flipped through the pages, and for a moment, she laughed quietly to herself, soft, private, and it made something ache in my chest. Then she looked at me, not directly, but just enough for me to feel seen. Not in the obvious, flashy way, but like someone had noticed the parts of me I didn't even know were there. And that's when she said it, her words hanging in the air, not to me, but perhaps to herself. "No one wants me." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't say anything. I just watched her, the sound of her voice echoing in my head, and felt my own life shift in a way I couldn't explain. That pause, that glance, that quiet vulnerability wrapped in her quiet confidence, it lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. I left the bookstore that day with a book in my hand, but something far heavier stayed behind. The feeling that, somehow, I had stumbled into the start of something I couldn't stop thinking about. Something that might, if I wasn't careful, change everything. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Yet there she was, standing in the corner of the small hotel lobby where I worked part-time, her arms folded over a stack of papers like she was holding herself together. The elevator dinged behind her, but she didn't move, just glanced toward the reception desk, and for a moment our eyes met. That same spark from the bookstore flickered, brief and dangerous, and I had to remind myself to breathe. She needed help. Her luggage had one of those impossible zippers that refused to cooperate, and I approached cautiously, not wanting to seem eager, not wanting her to push me away before I'd even begun. "Here, let me," I offered, keeping my tone light. My hands moved to her bag, fumbling slightly as I tried to ease the stubborn zipper. She stiffened, a micro-reaction, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I can manage," she said, voice clipped but softer than before. There was hesitation in her tone, a crack I wasn't supposed to notice. Her hands brushed mine as I tugged gently, and I froze. They were strong, confident hands with fine lines that hinted at long hours, and I caught the faint tremble in them. That tremble was enough to make my chest tighten in ways I hadn't expected. "You've had a long day, haven't you?" I asked, carefully casual, though my eyes lingered on her just a second too long. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to answer, then gave a small, tight-lipped smile. You could say that. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged for the briefest moment when she thought no one was looking, the little laugh she gave when she caught herself muttering something about the zipper. I wanted to reach out, to do more than help with the bag, but the unspoken boundary between us was palpable. She was guarded, distant, and yet somehow tender in ways she didn't show deliberately. Each movement she made, each glance she allowed, pulled me in quietly, but with gravity I couldn't resist. Finally, the zipper gave way. I handed the bag back, and she adjusted the strap over her shoulder, glancing at me with something between gratitude and an almost imperceptible apology. The silence hung in the air for a heartbeat too long, heavy and charged, like static before a storm. Then she laughed softly, a sound low and private, and for a moment she looked almost human in the way the light hit her hair and softened her edges. My chest ached with the odd mix of wanting to stay, wanting to speak, and knowing that some things weren't mine to claim. She paused at the door, just long enough for our hands to brush again. Not touching, really, but a whisper of contact that set my nerves alight. "See you around," she murmured, almost too quiet, and then she was gone, leaving the soft echo of her laugh in the hallway. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space, the slow pull of something forbidden already weaving itself into my chest. I didn't know what it meant yet, just that I couldn't stop thinking about her hands, her laugh, the way she carried herself with guarded elegance. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The rain had been drumming against the hotel windows for hours, a steady, insistent rhythm that made the lobby feel smaller, more intimate. I was stacking brochures behind the desk when she appeared, soaked at the edges, her coat clinging to her like she'd been fighting the storm alone. "You caught in this mess?" I asked, grabbing a towel from behind the counter without thinking. She hesitated, then gave a half-smile, the kind that hinted at something private, something she wasn't ready to share. "Something like that." I handed her the towel, and our fingers brushed just a second too long. I felt the warmth of her hand linger through the thin fabric, and I had to force myself not to linger there, not to lean in, not to let the space between us collapse. She looked at me for a beat, then turned toward the small seating area, dropping onto the edge of a leather chair. I followed, careful to keep a respectable distance, but close enough to feel her presence press against me in subtle ways. The way her hair smelled faintly of rain and shampoo, the soft sigh she let out as she wrung her hands. We were quiet, and in that quiet, something taut and unspoken threaded itself between us. I wanted to say something, I don't know what, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched her, watched the way her eyes darted toward the window, toward the street lights reflecting off puddles, and how her lips pressed together when she thought I wasn't looking. Then her phone buzzed, breaking the tension. She glanced at it, her expression tightening, and I saw a flicker of annoyance, or maybe hesitation, before she set it face down. I caught a glimpse of the name, a memory of someone she didn't want me to know about, and the room felt smaller, the storm outside louder, somehow. I swallowed, my hands tightening into fists at my sides, trying to keep calm. She looked back at me after a long pause, a half-smile that seemed to invite me into something dangerous. "Do you ever feel like some things just keep pulling at you, no matter how hard you try to resist?" Her words hung between us, delicate and sharp. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again, and settled on a simple, sometimes. Too little, too safe, but enough to acknowledge the thread connecting us. The lightning flashed outside, and in that sudden burst of light, our faces were just inches apart. I could see the way her breath caught, the subtle tremor of her shoulder as if the storm inside mirrored the one outside. I wanted to reach out, to brush her hair behind her ear, to bridge the space with something more than words. But the phone buzzed again, a reminder of reality, of rules, of lives that weren't ours to entangle. She leaned back slightly, a subtle exhale, and in that fraction of a second, the distance returned, but only barely. My heart ached with the weight of what almost happened, the tension that neither of us could, or would, name. I left that night with my uniform damp, my thoughts tangled, and the image of her sitting there, just close enough to feel, just far enough to be untouchable, burned into my chest. That fleeting, electric nearness haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was teetering on the edge of something neither of us was ready to admit. IT was quieter than usual in the back office, the hum of the old heater filling the gaps in conversation. She was sitting at the desk, sorting through some invoices, her shoulders hunched slightly, like she was carrying more than just papers. I lingered by the doorway, pretending to straighten a stack of files, but my eyes kept finding her. "You ever regret things?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, almost a whisper. I blinked, caught off guard. "Depends," I said cautiously. "Depends what you mean." She hesitated, twisting a pen between her fingers, staring at some invisible point on the floor. "You know choices. People. The ones you let slip away." Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. I recognized that tone, the one that hinted at old pain, the kind people rarely admit. For a moment, I didn't move, just watched her. There was a softness in her eyes that contrasted sharply with the confident, controlled woman everyone else saw. And then, she slid a folded photograph across the desk toward me. I picked it up carefully. It was faded, edges curling, a younger version of her laughing with someone whose face was half cut by the frame. My stomach tightened as I realized. She wasn't just guarded. She carried pieces of the past she hadn't shared with anyone. "That was a long time ago," she said, voice catching slightly. "I thought I could forget. But some memories, they follow you." I nodded slowly. "I get that. Sometimes the things we try to leave behind, they don't leave us." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw a crack in the armor she usually wore so effortlessly. Her hands, the same ones I'd noticed before, strong, capable, trembled slightly as she tucked the photo back into her folder. The briefest sigh escaped her lips, and I wanted to reach across the desk, to tell her it was okay to feel, okay to let someone in. Instead, I said nothing, letting the silence stretch in its own heavy way. There was a raw honesty in that quiet, something that didn't need words. It was just her, fragile and human, showing me a glimpse of the world she'd built around herself, and the walls she hadn't let anyone past. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo, about her laughter frozen in that moment, and about the gentle sadness in her eyes now. The realization hit me softly, like the edge of a wave brushing my feet. She carried loss with her everywhere, and that weight made every small act, every glance, every hesitant smile between us feel heavier, more urgent. When she finally looked up, her gaze met mine, steady but unguarded for a heartbeat. I felt the quiet tremor between us, the shift that I hadn't seen coming, the unspoken acknowledgement that something had changed, that the distance we'd been keeping was thinner than I thought. She closed her folder, tucked the photo away, and leaned back slightly. "I should get back to work," she murmured. But the way she said it, the softness lingering in her tone, made me realize that something subtle but seismic had just shifted between us. And for the first time, I felt that slow, careful pull of possibility. The office was empty, save for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant murmur of traffic outside. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, feet tucked beneath her, flipping through a notebook I hadn't noticed before. I lingered by the doorway, uncertain if I should speak or just let the silence do the work for me. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, and there it was again, the same quiet pull, subtle but undeniable, that had been threading through every interaction since the bookstore. Neither of us said anything at first. We didn't need to. The air between us was heavy with everything we'd skirted around, every glance and fleeting touch, every unspoken thought. "I never thought someone would notice me," she said finally, voice soft, almost fragile. I swallowed, stepping closer without meaning to, drawn by the gravity of her words. "I notice," I said, quietly, careful not to push. Not that she needed assurance. Exactly. It was more about acknowledging what had been there all along. She tilted her head, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "And you see all the wrong parts too." "I see you," I said simply. The truth was gentle, earned, and it didn't need more. It carried all the weight it had to. The past heartbreak, the lingering regrets, the small, slow-burning moments that had brought us here. She let out a soft exhale and moved slightly closer on the sofa, the space between us narrowing as if gravity itself had been guiding her. I sat down beside her, careful not to crowd, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. We shared the silence for a moment, letting it fill the gaps, letting it say what words never could. Her hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against mine. I froze for half a heartbeat, then let my fingers meet hers. Not in a grab, not in a declaration, just a gentle, deliberate connection that felt like a grounding point in the storm we'd been walking through. She leaned back slightly, head tilting toward me, and I could feel the subtle shift in her posture. Relaxation, trust, something inevitable forming. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. The room was small, the world outside irrelevant, and in that quiet moment, we both understood this was where we belonged, if only for this stretch of time, and that was enough. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint scent of her perfume, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, it all merged into a single, steady heartbeat in my chest. No grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, just the simple, earned truth that had been growing in every glance, every hesitation, every shared space between us. She squeezed my hand lightly, a whisper of a smile, and I realized that this quiet collapse, this shared understanding, was more profound than any shouted declaration ever could be. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch comfortably around us. She rested her head briefly against my shoulder, a fleeting, natural connection, and for the first time, I felt the weight of all the tension, longing, and uncertainty settle. And in that stillness, the story of us finally felt enough. It's strange how certain moments stay with you, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they quietly shift the way you see everything else. I think about her often, the way she moved through those small, ordinary days, and how a single glance or a soft word could feel like the world tilting just slightly in your favor. I've learned that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it creeps in slowly, almost imperceptibly, in shared silences, in small gestures, in the trust that grows when two people choose to be present despite the ghosts they carry. She taught me that. And maybe, in a way, I reminded her that someone could notice the pieces of her no one else seemed to see. There's still a faint ache when I think back to the stormy evenings, the near confessions, the little sparks of tension that kept me both tethered and hesitant. But that ache isn't painful. It's a gentle reminder of how carefully, imperfectly, we fell into something that felt inevitable. I see now that what made it real wasn't the perfection of the moments, but the humanity in them, the hesitations, the missteps, the fleeting vulnerabilities. She's changed too, in subtle ways. I see it when I remember the guarded strength she carried, and how, over time, she allowed small openings. A laugh shared, a touch not pulled away, a glance that lingered just long enough. I like to think she discovered, as I did, that intimacy isn't about grand gestures. It's about the quiet courage to let someone witness the parts of you you normally hide. As for me, I carry the memory of her differently now. I've learned patience, the power of observation, and the weight of quiet devotion. I've learned that connection isn't something you force. It's something you nurture, gently, day by day. And in that nurturing, there's a kind of magic that doesn't announce itself loudly, but changes you entirely. The last time I saw her, we sat in that same small office, hands brushing, shoulders close, letting silence speak what words could not. I remember the way her head rested lightly against my shoulder, a soft acknowledgement of trust and presence, and I felt the slow, careful certainty of something that had begun as a spark and became enduring. Life has moved forward since then. We've gone our separate ways in many ways, yet the memory lingers, shaping how I approach people, moments, and love itself. It's not a story of dramatic declarations or sweeping confessions. It's a story of noticing, listening, and allowing hearts to meet without rushing. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between memories, I realize that's what makes it unforgettable. That's what makes it real. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?